Why You'd Hate Living in a Victorian City, Part 1. Welcome, dear viewer, to what will surely be the worst day of your life. Or rather, every day of your life, because you've just woken up in a Victorian city. The year is somewhere between 1830 and 1890, and you're about to discover why modern plumbing, labour laws and basic hygiene standards are blessings you've taken for granted. You wanted an authentic historical experience? Congratulations. You've got cholera, the awakening, your miserable Victorian morning. Your eyes crack open to darkness. Not the peaceful darkness of your bedroom with blackout curtains, but the grimy, oppressive darkness of a tenement room you share with 6 other people, none of whom you're related to. The damp has seeped into your bones overnight, as it does every night in this single-room dwelling, where the walls weep with condensation like they're mourning the lives slowly being extinguished within them. You're lying on a straw mattress that rustles with each movement, though not all of that rustling comes from the straw. Your bedmates include a family of lice that have made your scalp their empire and are currently engaged in a bitter territorial dispute with the fleas that prefer the warm, moist regions of your armpits. The mattress itself sits directly on the floor, a luxury compared to those who sleep on piles of rags in the corner, or worse yet, directly on the bare wooden planks that are rotting from decades of spilled chamber pots and leaked roof water. The air is thick with the mingled breath of your roommates, a family of Irish immigrants who took you in when you arrived with nothing but the clothes on your back. In Victorian London, housing for the working poor is a nightmare of overcrowding. Entire families are crammed into single rooms with sometimes 8 to 10 people sharing a space barely 12 feet square. Studies from the 1840s revealed that in the poorest neighborhoods, a single house, originally built for one family, might now contain up to 30 people spread across its subdivided rooms. The space is so cramped that you sleep in shifts, with those working night jobs using the beds while day workers are at the factories and vice versa. It's not uncommon for a bed to be occupied by different people for 24 hours straight, never cooling, never truly clean. The concept of personal space is as foreign here as indoor plumbing or adequate nutrition. When housing inspectors come, which is rarely, landlords have been known to temporarily move people out to make the overcrowding less obvious. They'll be back as soon as the inspector leaves. "Morning already?" croaks the woman on your left. She's been coughing all night, that deep, wet, rattling cough that suggests the consumption has firmly established itself in her lungs. Tuberculosis is your constant companion in these cramped quarters, along with typhoid, cholera, and smallpox. Just a few of the delightful neighbours who might pop in for a visit. In the 1840s, the life expectancy in Liverpool's working-class neighbourhoods was just 25 years. Even by the end of the Victorian period, it had only risen to about 42 years overall, with working-class people falling well below that average. The TB patient beside you won't see a doctor. Doctors cost money, and money is something you don't have. Instead, she'll continue working until she physically collapses, at which point she'll either recover on her own, or more likely, die in this very room, while everyone else continues to live, sleep, and eat around her wasting body. Medicine in Victorian England is almost as likely to kill you as the disease itself, with treatments including mercury, arsenic, and opium, administered liberally and with confident ignorance. Above you, the ceiling is stained yellow-brown from years of coal smoke. The single window, if your room is fortunate enough to have one, is opaque with grime, allowing only the dimmest suggestion of daylight to penetrate the gloom. But it's enough to reveal the peeling wallpaper, black with mold at the corners, and the single table that serves as kitchen, dining room, work surface, and occasionally makeshift bed when there are too many bodies and too little floor. The wallpaper itself might be killing you slowly. That fashionable green pattern contains arsenic, a slow poison that enters your lungs with every breath. Not that you'll live long enough for the arsenic to be your primary concern. The more immediate threat is the structural integrity of the building itself. Tenements are known to simply collapse from time to time, burying their residents under tons of poorly maintained brick and timber. Your squalid toilet arrangement. Your first task of the day is to relieve yourself. There's no bathroom, of course. The idea of a dedicated room for personal hygiene would be laughable if any of you had the energy to laugh. Instead, a chipped ceramic chamber pot waits in the corner, already half full from nighttime use. The smell hits you like a physical blow, a mixture of ammonia and something worse, something distinctly human and unmistakably unhealthy. You'll have to empty it in the communal privy in the backyard, an experience you've learned to dread. The stairwell you navigate is its own health hazard. The wood is rotting, the nails loosening, and several steps have collapsed entirely, requiring a nimble jump that's especially challenging while carrying a sloshing container of overnight waste. The building is technically condemned, has been for years, but with housing in such short supply and landlords caring only for profit, no one enforces the closure orders. In the most impoverished areas, 200 people might share a single toilet. In some tenements there's no toilet at all, just a cesspit in the basement that overflows during heavy rain, sending a tide of excrement washing across the floor. The term basement apartment takes on a whole new meaning when you realize what might be flowing under your door during a storm. The backyard privy is a ramshackle wooden structure housing a plank with a hole cut in it, positioned over a pit. The pit is supposed to be emptied regularly by night soil men, but they're weeks behind schedule. The stench is unimaginable, so thick you could spread it on toast if you had toast, which you don't. This is your bathroom. This is civilization in the heart of the world's most powerful empire. Even the relatively well-off working families might share an outdoor privy with 4 or 5 other families. The stench in summer is unbearable, and in winter the freezing temperatures make lingering over your business impossible. For women, the lack of privacy is particularly degrading. Chamber pots are emptied into streets, gutters, or directly into the Thames, depending on proximity. Until the 1850s and 60s, London had no comprehensive sewer system, meaning human waste literally piled up where it fell. To get back to your room, you'll have to pass through the central courtyard of the tenement block, a narrow, sunless space that serves as a catch-all for garbage, broken furniture, and sometimes the bodies of rats or stray cats that have succumbed to disease or starvation. Children play here, their pale faces and stunted bodies testament to the malnutrition and rickets that plague the poor. They're running some game involving a dead rat and a stick, the Victorian equivalent of a PlayStation, washing and dressing for a day of misery. You wash your face in a basin of cold water that's already been used by 3 people before you. Soap is a luxury, so you make do with a quick rinse. Your teeth? A finger rubbed over them will have to suffice. The wealthy might use toothbrushes with boar bristles and bicarbonate of soda, but you'll make do with frayed twigs, or, if you're flush with an extra penny, a rag dipped in soot. Dental care is primitive at best. Toothaches are resolved by extraction, usually without anesthesia unless you count the gin you might gulp beforehand. Your clothing situation is as dire as your dental hygiene. You own 2 sets of clothes, the slightly less filthy ones for Sunday church attendance, where you'll be reminded that your poverty is a moral failing, and the work clothes you're pulling on now. They're stiff with accumulated sweat, coal dust, and other unidentifiable substances. Laundry is done perhaps once a month, if that, in a communal tub in the yard using harsh lye soap that leaves your hands raw and bleeding. Your undergarments, if you're fortunate enough to have them, haven't been changed in weeks. For women, menstruation is a monthly nightmare managed with rags that are washed and reused until they literally disintegrate. Infections are common, treatment rare. Children often don't have underwear at all. They're an unnecessary expense for growing bodies. Your shoes, if you have them, are communal property, worn by whoever in the household has to go out that day. The concept of getting ready for the day takes on a grim irony when there's so little to get ready with. You have no mirror, your appearance is the least of your concerns, and reflective surfaces are for people with something to reflect upon. You run fingers through hair crawling with lice, straighten garments stained and tattered beyond recognition as clothing, and prepare to face another day of brutal survival in what is supposedly the height of modern civilization. The breakfast, that barely deserves the name. Breakfast, if you can call it that, is a cup of tea so weak it's essentially dirty water with a memory of tea leaves and a crust of bread that's turning green at the edges. If you're particularly fortunate, there might be a smear of dripping, congealed animal fat salvaged from someone else's roasting pan. It's not so much a meal as a vague suggestion that food exists somewhere in the world, just not here. The bread is adulterated, of course. Victorian food fraud is an art form. Your loaf likely contains chalk, alum, or even ground bones to bulk it out. The tea might be mixed with used leaves collected from more affluent households, or coloured with copper to appear stronger. Even the milk, if you're wealthy enough to afford it, is watered down and possibly whitened with chalk or, in particularly innovative cases, pureed calf brains. Food safety laws, those won't come until later, after enough middle-class people have been poisoned to make it a priority. For the poorest Victorians, hunger is a constant companion. During the 1840s, mass starvation was common in many parts of the UK. By 1901, though conditions had improved somewhat, almost a third of the population still lived in poverty, with about 10% in a state of desperate hunger. An 1840s report described an elderly man whose body was little more than a skeleton, his wife as the very personification of want, and their child as a skeleton infant. The children in the family are already up and about, preparing for their day at the factory. The youngest is 6, the oldest 12. Their mother is shouting at them to hurry. If they're late, they'll lose half a day's wages, and the family can't afford that. They gulp down their crusts and are gone, clattering down the creaking stairs, to join the river of humanity flowing toward the factories. Child labour is not just common but essential to family survival. Children as young as 4 work in mines, factories, and as chimney sweeps, their small bodies perfect for squeezing into tight, dangerous spaces. The mother looks exhausted already, though the day has barely begun. She'll spend her hours doing piecework, sewing garments for a pittance, each stitch taking her closer to blindness in the dim light of the tenement. The baby strapped to her back will breathe in the lint and dust all day, developing the chronic cough that's already claimed 2 of her children. But there's no alternative. It's work or starve, and sometimes it's both. Entering the urban hellscape. You step outside into the street, and the assault on your senses is immediate and overwhelming. The road is a thick soup of mud, horse manure, and unidentifiable rotting matter. By the 1890s, London's 300,000 horses were producing approximately 1,000 tons of dung per day. Let that sink in, 1,000 tons of horse excrement daily on the streets where you walk. The manure dries, turns to dust, and is whipped up by the wind to coat your clothes, your skin, your lungs. It's like commuting through an open sewer, but with more pickpockets. The The streets are cleaned, in theory, by boys aged 12 to 14 who dart between traffic trying to scoop up fresh droppings before they're trampled into a slick, dangerous pace. It's an impossible task. The volume is simply too great. The street cleaners are fighting a losing battle against the biological output of hundreds of thousands of working animals. Speaking of which, you clutch your few possessions close. These streets teem with desperate characters, professional thieves, yes, but also simply the desperately poor. Children as young as 5, workers, dippers, small enough to slip tiny hands into coat pockets and extract whatever valuables they find. Their alternative is starvation. In the 1840s, Lord Ashley referred to more than 30,000 naked, filthy, roaming, lawless and deserted children in and around the metropolis. The streets themselves are chaotic, unplanned and dangerous. In older parts of the city, they follow medieval layouts never intended for industrial-era traffic. Narrow alleys open suddenly onto main thoroughfares where carriages and carts race by at terrifying speeds. Traffic accidents are common and often fatal. The concept of pedestrian right-of-way doesn't exist, and the drivers of coaches rarely slow for mere walking humans. It's survival of the fleetest. You dodge between carriages, narrowly avoiding being splashed with filth from the wheels. The wealthy pass by in closed carriages, their view of the squalor obscured by fine curtains. The glass separating them from the reality of Victorian urban life might as well be 100 feet thick. Occasionally, you glimpse their faces, pale, often inbred features of the aristocracy, looking out with a mixture of disgust and fear at the teeming masses. The smog closes in around you, a thick, yellowish-brown fog that tastes of sulphur and coal dust. On the worst days, it's so dense that people have been known to walk straight into the Thames, unable to see the water until they're drowning in it. This pea super is a deadly cocktail of coal smoke, factory emissions and moisture, a caustic cloud that burns your eyes and scorches your throat. During particularly bad episodes, even indoor theatres have to close because the smog penetrates buildings, making it impossible to see the stage from the back of the room. You pass a woman collapsed on the street, coughing blood into a filthy handkerchief. No one stops to help. Disease is so common that the sick become invisible. The miasma theory still dominates medical thinking, the belief that disease is spread through bad air rather than germs or contaminated water. It's partly right, in that the air is indeed terrible, but for the wrong reasons. This misconception means that genuine solutions to disease are overlooked in favor of ineffective measures like burning tar to purify the air. The street layout is a medieval nightmare that's been patched and expanded with no planning or forethought. Narrow alleys open suddenly into crowded markets where vendors sell everything from questionable meat pies to stolen handkerchiefs. The smell from the butcher's stall would turn a modern health inspector into a gibbering wreck. Meat hangs in the open air, buzzing with flies, its provenance questionable at best. Is that actually beef, or perhaps an unfortunate stray dog? Better not to ask. Food adulteration is so common that buying anything is a gamble with your digestive system. Street food is available if you have a penny to spare. Hot eels, pea soup, baked potatoes, whelks, all of it prepared with unwashed hands in unsanitary conditions, served in containers that have been cleaned by being wiped with a rag that's been in continuous use since the coronation. The alternative is to wait until your single daily meal, likely consisting of more bread, perhaps some potatoes, and if you're extremely lucky, a sliver of bacon or salted fish. You're approaching your workplace now, moving with the flow of humanity toward the factories and workshops that power the British Empire. The streets near industrial areas are even more polluted, the buildings blackened with soot to the point where their original color is a mere memory. The trees, if any survive, are stunted and twisted, their leaves coated with a thick layer of grime that never washes away, even in the heaviest rain. A group of street urchins runs past, laughing as they snatch an apple from a vendor's cart. They'll be lucky to reach adulthood. The mortality rate for children in Victorian cities is staggering. In some areas, 25% die before their 5th birthday. The causes range from malnutrition to preventable diseases to industrial accidents to simple neglect. Childhood is a luxury for the wealthy. For the poor, it's a brief prelude to exploitation. Your destination looms ahead, a brick monstrosity, belching black smoke into the already befouled sky. The factory, the workhouse, the mill, whatever form your daily torment takes, it's a place of danger, exhaustion, and dehumanization. For most working-class Victorians, the workday is 12-14 hours long, 6 days a week. Sunday is for church, where you'll be reminded that your poverty is part of God's great plan and that you should accept your lot with Christian humility. The gates of the factory yard stand open, swallowing workers like some great industrial beast. Above them might as well be written, "Abandon hope, all ye who enter here." But you have no choice. It's this or starvation for you and any who depend on you. So you take a deep breath of fouled air, straighten your aching back, and step forward into another day of Victorian progress. Why you'd hate living in a Victorian city. Part 2. The Workplace. Industrial Revolution's Human Cost. The factory floor is a vision of hell, filtered through the lens of industrial capitalism. Massive machines thunder and clank, unguarded belts, and gears waiting to snatch at loose clothing or careless fingers. The air is thick with cotton dust or metal filings depending on the industry, particles that will eventually scar your lungs beyond repair. The noise is so deafening that workers develop a form of sign language to communicate, their actual voices rendered useless by the mechanical roar. After years here, most workers develop partial deafness, nature's small mercy in this infernal environment. The foreman spots you and gestures angrily for you to take your position. You're late by perhaps 2 minutes, and this infraction might cost you a quarter of your day's wages. Time discipline is brutal in Victorian factories. Workers are frequently locked in to prevent them from leaving early, a practice that has led to countless deaths when fires break out and escape is impossible. The factory owner sees this as an acceptable risk. Workers are replaceable, while lost production time is not. Children dart between the machines, sweeping up debris or fixing jammed mechanisms. Their small bodies are perfect for squeezing into tight spaces. Some as young as 4 or 5 work as trappers, sitting in the dark for 12-hour shifts, opening and closing ventilation doors in coal mines. Others clean machinery while it's still running, leading to horrific accidents. A child caught in the machinery is considered a regrettable but expected occurrence. Production barely stops long enough to remove the mangled body. You watch as an 8-year-old boy is beaten for falling asleep at his post. He's been working since 4 a.m. and his body simply gave out. There are no child labour laws yet, not meaningful ones anyway. The first Factory Act of 1833 only restricted children aged 9 to 13 to a mere 48-hour work week and required a laughable 2 hours of education daily, which factory owners largely ignored. Inspectors are few, easily bribed, and rarely venture into the most dangerous workplaces. Near you, a young girl no more than 9 years old operates a power loom. Her job requires constant attention. A moment's distraction could mean losing fingers or worse. Her face is blank with exhaustion, small hands moving automatically through motions she could perform in her sleep, and sometimes does, swaying on her feet in a state between wakefulness and unconsciousness. Factory children like her typically receive no more than 3 years of education in their entire lives. They are, for all practical purposes, sacrificed to industrial progress. The air inside the factory is worse than outside, if that's possible. In textile mills, the cotton fibers form a thick dust that workers inhale constantly, developing brown lung or byssinosis. In match factories, workers, primarily young women, are slowly poisoned by phosphorus, developing the horrific foci, jaw, where the jawbone literally decays while the victim still lives. Metal grinders inhale metal dust, coal miners inhale coal dust, and everyone inhales the omnipresent smoke from the factory's own furnaces. The overseer announces that production quotas have been increased again. Workers will need to handle more. Machines move faster, take fewer breaks. Anyone failing to meet the new targets will be dismissed. In the Victorian industrial economy, there is always someone hungrier, more desperate, willing to take your place. The concept of job security doesn't exist. You are as disposable as the factory rags used to wipe oil from the machines. A cry cuts through even the machine noise. Someone has been caught in a power belt. The massive machinery is stopped just long enough to remove the injured worker, who is carried out leaving a trail of blood. There is no compensation for workplace injuries, no safety regulations worth the paper they're printed on. The injured worker faces a stark choice: heal quickly and return to work, find a new occupation that accommodates their maiming, or descend into destitution and the workhouse. The noon whistle signals a brief respite, 30 minutes to consume whatever meager food you've brought. For many, it's just more bread, perhaps with a bit of cheese, if they're fortunate. Some have nothing and simply sit, conserving energy. The factory doesn't provide meals or eating areas. Workers sit on the floor among the machines, ingesting industrial particles along with their food. Water, if available, comes from a communal dipper that passes from mouth to mouth, spreading whatever illnesses are making the rounds. During this break, you observe your fellow workers. Most are undersized, their growth stunted by malnutrition and overwork since childhood. Many have visible deformities from years of repetitive motions or poor posture required by their jobs. Spinners develop bowed legs, miners a permanent stoop, chimney sweeps twisted spines. Industrial work literally reshapes human bodies to fit its mechanical needs. Women workers face additional challenges. Factory owners prefer them for many tasks, because they can be paid even less than men, about 1/3 the wages for the same work. Pregnant women work until the moment of delivery, sometimes giving birth on the factory floor, and return to work days or even hours later. Sexual harassment and assault by overseers is common and without remedy. A woman who complains is simply fired. Many young female workers are forced into prostitution to supplement their inadequate wages, particularly during seasonal layoffs. The break ends too soon, and the machinery roars back to life. You have another 8 hours ahead before release. The afternoon is always worse. Fatigue accumulates, accidents become more common, the air grows thicker with dust and smoke. By day's end, you'll be barely able to stand, yet you'll need to walk miles back to your tenement through streets that grow more dangerous as darkness falls. Time stretches in the factory, each minute an eternity of the same repetitive motion, the same deafening noise, the same foul air. There are no breaks, no moments of human interaction or mental stimulation. Workers have been known to lose their minds from the monotony, developing a vacant stare known as factory face. The human spirit isn't meant to endure such conditions, but the body is given no choice. The factory's demands on the body are unrelenting. Workers develop specific industrial diseases, chimney sweeps cancer, miners black lung, match girls foci jaw. These occupational illnesses are so common they're considered normal, the expected price of earning a living. Medical care, if available at all, is primitive and often makes things worse. Factory owners take no responsibility. A worker who becomes too ill to function is simply replaced. Speeds increase again as the day's end approaches. The owner wants to squeeze every possible unit of production from his human machines before shutdown. This is when the most horrific accidents occur, as exhausted workers make mistakes or cut corners to keep up. Fingers caught in gears, hair wrapped around spindles, limbs crushed in presses, the factories run red with blood, the human cost of industrial progress written in mangled flesh. The great stink and public health nightmares. The day wears on, and as the afternoon heat intensifies, so does the already overwhelming stench of the city. If it's summer in London during the 1850s, you might be experiencing what contemporaries called the Great Stink. The Thames, that iconic river of British power and prestige, has become nothing more than an open sewer. The smell is so powerful it's almost visible, a miasma that seems to have physical weight and texture. For centuries, London's waste has been dumped directly into the river. By the 1850s, with a population over 2 million, the Thames has become a thick, poisonous soup. Raw sewage, industrial chemicals, animal carcasses, and every imaginable form of human filth flows sluggishly through the heart of the city. During the summer of 1858, the stench became so unbearable that Parliament, whose windows overlooked the river, had to suspend sessions. Curtains soaked in chloride of lime were hung in the windows in a futile attempt to filter the putrid air. The river itself has become so polluted that it's biologically dead. No fish can survive in its toxic waters. Yet ironically, this same river is a primary source of drinking water for many Londoners. Water companies draw directly from the Thames, often at points just downstream from sewage outlets, and pipe this deadly cocktail directly into homes and public pumps. The filtration, when it exists at all, is laughably inadequate, essentially just allowing larger solids to settle before distribution. Disease is everywhere, a constant threat hanging over Victorian cities like the smog itself. Cholera, the most feared killer, sweeps through urban areas in devastating epidemics. Between 1831 and 1866, 4 major cholera outbreaks ravaged London. The 1848-49 epidemic alone claimed over 14,000 lives in the city. The symptoms are horrific: violent vomiting, uncontrollable diarrhea, agonizing muscle cramps, and death from dehydration, often within hours of the first symptoms. The true horror is that these deaths were preventable. Dr. John Snow had proven in 1854 that cholera was spread through contaminated water, not miasma or bad air, as commonly believed. His evidence included the 70 workers in a Soho brewery who only drank beer and all survived an outbreak that killed their neighbours. But his findings were ignored by medical authorities who clung to outdated theories. People continued to drink. Water drawn directly from the Thames, water that contained the raw sewage of millions. Your local water pump, if you're fortunate enough to have one, is shared by hundreds of people. The water comes from wells often contaminated by nearby cesspits, or worse, is pumped directly from the Thames. It comes out brown and chunky, with visible particles floating in it, but you drink it anyway. What choice do you have? Even when cholera is actively killing your neighbours, the connection between the water and the disease isn't widely accepted. People continue to line up at the deadly pumps, unknowingly filling their cups with death, typhoid, dysentery, and countless other waterborne diseases are your constant companions. In the most impoverished areas, raw sewage might flow directly through the streets or bubble up through the floorboards when it rains. Open sewers run down the middle of narrow alleys where children play. The concept of sanitation is so foreign that people routinely draw their drinking water from the same rivers where they dump their waste. The rat population thrives in this environment, carrying fleas that spread typhus and bubonic plague. These rats aren't the shy creatures that scurry away at human approach. They're bold, aggressive, and numerous enough to attack sleeping infants. In the poorest dwellings, families must take turns staying awake to keep rats away from sleeping children. Rat bites frequently become infected, leading to amputations or death in an era before antibiotics. Respiratory diseases flourish in the polluted air and overcrowded housing. Tuberculosis, consumption, in Victorian parlance, is so common that its symptoms are considered almost normal. The romantic image of the consumptive with flushed cheeks and bright eyes belies the reality of a wasting disease that drowns its victims in their own blood. Whooping cough, diphtheria, and pneumonia claim thousands of lives annually, particularly among the very young and the elderly. Public health initiatives are primitive and often counterproductive. When epidemics strike, authorities might order the streets to be washed, inadvertently flooding basements with contaminated water and spreading disease further. Fever hospitals concentrate the infected but do little to cure them, becoming death houses where overworked staff can provide little more than basic comfort to the dying. Vaccination exists for smallpox but is viewed with suspicion by many and is not required or universally available. The dead pile up during epidemics, overwhelming the burial system. Corpses might remain in homes for days, sharing rooms with the living while arrangements are made. Pauper burials involve mass graves, bodies stacked like cordwood with minimal ceremony. Cemetery overcrowding is so severe that older remains are routinely dug up to make room for new arrivals, with the displaced bones stored in charnel houses or ground up for fertilizer. At the height of the Great Stink in 1858, workers spread lime along the Thames foreshore in a futile attempt to mask the smell. Between 200 and 250 tons of lime were used weekly at a cost of $1,500, an enormous sum that did almost nothing to address the actual problem. Only when Parliament itself could no longer function due to the stench did serious reform begin. Self-interest, not humanitarian concern, finally spurred action. The solution, when it finally came, was engineering on a grand scale. Joseph Bazalgette's sewer system, built between 1859 and 1875, involved 100 miles of street sewers feeding into 82 miles of main interceptor sewers. These massive tunnels diverted waste away from the Thames in central London, carrying it downstream to be released on the outgoing tide. The system was a marvel of Victorian engineering and would never have been built if the stench hadn't reached Parliament itself. Even with these improvements, water quality remained questionable. Private water companies resisted regulation, and filtration technology was primitive. The poor continued to suffer disproportionately. Water supplies to wealthy. Neighborhoods were more reliable and of better quality. Public wells and pumps upon which the poorest depended were the most likely to be contaminated. Clean water, like so many other necessities, was distributed according to class rather than need. The class divide, a tale of two Britons. As the afternoon wears on, you catch glimpses of another world, the Victorian upper class going about their leisurely business. Ladies in voluminous dresses float by on the arms of gentlemen in top hats, both careful to hold scented handkerchiefs to their noses when passing too close to the working poor. Their carriages have springs and cushioned seats. Their clothes are cleaned daily. Their water is filtered and boiled. Their children do not work in factories. It is, for all practical purposes, a different universe operating in parallel to your own. The class divide in Victorian Britain isn't just pronounced, it's a yawning chasm, a different reality. While you live in a single fetid room with 6 others, The upper classes reside in spacious townhouses with separate rooms for every conceivable purpose. While your children work in factories and mines, theirs attend exclusive schools or are tutored at home. While you drink water thick with cholera bacteria, they sip imported wine. While you work until your body breaks down, they debate politics and literature in comfortable drawing rooms. The Victorian era is famous for its moralism and charity work, but these often come with a hefty dose of condescension and hypocrisy. The same upper-class ladies who volunteer at orphanages might wear dresses sewn by children working 16-hour days in sweatshops. The gentlemen who condemn the immorality of the poor often keep mistresses or visit prostitutes, many of whom are desperate girls as young as 12. Religious morality is weaponized against the poor. Your poverty is framed not as a failure of society, but as a personal moral failing, or worse, as God's will. The Church preaches acceptance of your lot, promising rewards in heaven for suffering endured on earth. Meanwhile, the wealthy justify their privilege as divine favor, evidence of their superior moral character. The hypocrisy is breathtaking but systematic, a convenient theology that justifies extreme inequality. For those who fall through even the poorest safety net of Victorian charity, there is the workhouse, an institution designed to be so unpleasant that only the truly desperate would seek admission. Families are separated upon entry, with men, women, and children housed in different sections and allowed to meet only briefly at scheduled times. Food is minimal and monotonous, primarily gruel and bread. Work is mind-numbing and pointless. By design, breaking stones, picking oakum, unraveling old ropes, or turning a crank for hours. The purpose is not rehabilitation, but punishment for the crime of poverty. The middle class, growing during this period, exists in yet another reality. Neither destitute nor truly wealthy, they cultivate respectability with almost religious fervor. Their homes are shrines to proper behavior, with drawing rooms kept pristine for receiving visitors and separate parlors for family use. They employ servants, usually young women from rural areas, who work 16-hour days for minimal wages and live in attic rooms or damp basements. The middle-class housewife's primary job is maintaining appearances, ensuring that the family projects an image of moral and financial solidity regardless of the reality behind closed doors. The law itself operates differently depending on your class. A wealthy man caught in a compromising situation might receive a discreet warning or be allowed to leave through the back door of a raided establishment. A poor man guilty of the same infraction faces public arrest, humiliation, and harsh punishment. Judges routinely hand down different sentences for identical crimes based solely on the defendant's social standing. Justice, like everything else in Victorian Britain, is distributed according to one's position in the hierarchy. While you struggle for bare survival, the upper classes engage in elaborate social rituals. The season in London brings a whirlwind of balls, dinners, and exhibitions where the wealthy display themselves to each other. Young women are presented at court, launching them into the marriage market, where they are assessed primarily on their dowries and connections. Young men attend university not primarily for education, but to make the social connections that will secure their futures. Merit is an afterthought in a world where birthright and wealth determine almost everything. The visual markers of class are unmistakable. The wealthy are literally bigger, better fed, better housed, untouched by the stunting effects of child labor and malnutrition. Their skin is clear, their teeth relatively intact, their posture straight. The poor are physically marked by their deprivation, short stature, stooped shoulders, missing teeth, skin diseases, premature aging. By age 30, a working-class woman might physically resemble a wealthy woman of 60, her body worn down by labor, childbearing, and privation. Healthcare, like everything else, operates on a two-tier system. The wealthy receive home visits from physicians, cutting-edge treatments, which are often harmful but delivered with confidence, and private rooms in clean hospitals when necessary. The poor make do with charitable dispensaries, overcrowded wards where multiple patients share beds, or, most commonly, no treatment at all. Hospitals for the poor are as much about moral instruction as healing. Patients are expected to demonstrate proper gratitude and reformation in exchange for care. Children's experiences diverge most dramatically of all. Upper-class children inhabit a world of nurseries, governesses, pony rides, and elaborate toys. Their education is comprehensive, if somewhat rigid, preparing boys for university and girls for advantageous marriages. Middle-class children attend day schools, learning practical skills alongside basic academics. Working-class children, if they receive any education at all, get a few years of rote learning in overcrowded charity schools before being sent to work. By age 10, children from different classes might as well be different species. So profound is the gap in their experiences and prospects. The poor are different from us, a society matron might remark over tea, and in a way she's right, but not for the reasons she believes. Poverty in Victorian Britain isn't just about having less. It's about living in an entirely different world governed by different rules, expectations, and possibilities. The myth of social mobility exists, but the reality is that the vast majority are trapped in the circumstances of their birth, with escape nearly impossible despite the popular narratives of self-made men and rags-to-riches transformations. As the workday finally ends, the machines slow and you prepare to re-enter the filthy streets. You're keenly aware of the unbridgeable gap between your reality and that of the wealthy who profit from your labor. Your body aches from work that will never make you anything but poor. Your lungs burn from air that will eventually kill you. Your stomach cramps from food that barely deserves the name. This is Victorian progress, a gleaming facade built on a foundation of human suffering so vast and normalized that it becomes invisible except to those enduring it, the evening descent into urban chaos. As the workday finally ends, you join the throng of exhausted workers making their way home through streets now dark with more than just pollution. Gaslight, if your area has it, creates small islands of sickly yellow illumination that barely penetrate the smog. Most streets remain in darkness, perfect for the footpads and cutpurses who make the night their hunting ground. The lamplighter moves from post to post, his long pole extending to ignite each gas lamp, a brief flare of warmth in the gathering gloom. Crime is rampant in Victorian cities. The Metropolitan Police, founded in 1829, are few in number and viewed with suspicion by many. In the poorest areas, they venture only in groups. The most notorious criminal areas, like London's East End, become practically lawless after dark. This is the era of Jack the Ripper, whose murders of impoverished women in 1888 epitomize the dangers faced by the most vulnerable. The press sensationalized these killings, feeding a public obsession with the macabre while largely ignoring the systemic conditions that created such vulnerability in the first place. The streetwalkers emerge as darkness falls, many of them desperately young. Child prostitution is rampant, with girls as young as 12 working in brothels or on the streets. Some are orphans, others have been sold by their families. Still others choose this over starvation or the workhouse. Venereal disease is rampant and untreatable. Syphilis and gonorrhea spread through all classes, though the wealthy can afford treatments that temporarily mask the symptoms. The Contagious Diseases Acts of the 1860s allow police to arrest any woman suspected of prostitution and force her to undergo invasive examinations, a law that targets the women while leaving their clients untouched. You hurry past gin palaces and pubs, their windows glowing with warm light, the sounds of raucous laughter spilling out. For many, alcohol is the only escape from the grinding misery of Victorian working-class life. Gin is cheap and potent, capable of temporarily blotting out the reality of existence. Temperance crusaders condemn the drinking habits of the poor, while ignoring the conditions that drive them to seek oblivion in a bottle. The alcoholic beverage of choice follows class lines: gin for the poorest, beer for workers, wine and spirits for the wealthy. The streets grow more treacherous after dark. The inadequate sewage system means that gutters overflow with filth, invisible in the darkness until you step into it. Uncollected garbage piles up on corners, providing feasts for rats and breeding grounds for disease. Dead animals, horses, dogs, cats, sometimes even human infants, might lie for days before being collected, the stench adding to the already foul urban miasma. The smog, already oppressive during the day, takes on an almost supernatural quality at night. The gas lamps create halos of dirty yellow light that barely penetrate a few feet. People appear and disappear like ghosts in the fog, making navigation treacherous and encouraging criminal activity. On the worst nights, the smog is so thick that it's possible to walk off the edge of a bridge into the Thames without seeing the water until you're drowning in it. Street entertainers try to eke out a living in this hostile environment. Organ grinders with malnourished monkeys, children singing for pennies, amateur acrobats, fire eaters. Their performances are desperate rather than joyful, each act a plea for enough coins to secure a night's lodging or a crust of bread. Street musicians compete with the vendors still hawking their wares: hot chestnuts, baked potatoes, meat pies of questionable origin. The journey home takes you past scenes of everyday tragedy: a mother wailing over a child taken by fever, an old man collapsed in a doorway, a family being evicted for failure to pay rent. These are not unusual occurrences, but the background noise of Victorian urban life, so common they barely register except to those directly affected. Death and suffering are omnipresent, particularly for the young and the old. Food vendors dispose of the day's unsold goods, creating brief frenzies as the hungry poor scramble for anything edible. Stale bread, wilted vegetables, meat on the edge of spoilage, all are fought over by those for whom even such questionable nourishment is better than nothing. The concept of food safety is in its infancy. Adulteration is the norm rather than the exception. Bread contains chalk, milk is watered down, tea is mixed with used leaves or colored with copper compounds, beer is laced with strychnine to add bitterness. Street children, some as young as 3 or 4, roam in packs or alone, finding shelter where they can. Many are orphans, others have been abandoned or have run away from abusive homes. They survive by begging, stealing, prostitution, or performing menial tasks like sweeping crossings clear of horse manure so that pedestrians can pass without soiling their shoes. Their life expectancy is brutally short. Many will die before reaching adulthood, victims of exposure, starvation, disease, or violence. The air grows colder as night deepens, a particular threat to those already weakened by disease or malnutrition. Tuberculosis, pneumonia, bronchitis, the respiratory killers thrive in these conditions, in bodies already compromised by industrial pollutants and overcrowded living. The coughing chorus rises from tenements and lodging houses, a symphony of suffering that forms the soundtrack of urban poverty. Why You'd Hate Living in a Victorian City, Part 3. Home Sweet Home. The Tenement Nightmare. You return to your tenement, climbing the stairs that groan beneath your weight. The building itself seems to be slowly dying, rotting from the inside out. In the worst housing, up to 90% of the available space is built upon, leaving almost no room for light or air to penetrate. These structures, called back-to-backs or courthouses in some cities, share walls on 3 sides, with only one wall having windows or access to the outside world. The staircase is treacherous. Several steps have broken through completely, requiring a precarious leap. The handrail came loose years ago and was never replaced. In the dim light provided by a single, smoky tallow candle on the landing, you can see evidence of previous accidents, dark stains on the wood from falls that proved fatal. Building regulations exist in theory but are rarely enforced in poor areas. Landlords divide and subdivide houses built for single families, creating warrens of tiny rooms while providing minimal maintenance. The result is housing that is not just uncomfortable, but actively dangerous. The Irish family is cooking their evening meal when you enter, potatoes, if they're lucky, perhaps supplemented with a cabbage or onion. The room is filled with steam and smoke from the small fire, making the air even more unbreathable than usual. The youngest child is crying with hunger. The oldest looks hollow-eyed with exhaustion after a day at the factory. The father hasn't found work in weeks. His lung disease makes him an unreliable employee in the eyes of factory managers who have an endless supply of desperate, healthy workers to choose from. The meal is prepared in the same room where everyone sleeps, works, bathes, rarely, and relieves themselves at night. The concept of separate spaces for different activities is a luxury for the wealthy. Here, a single pot might serve for cooking, washing clothes and bathing infants. Utensils are few and shared. The fire provides inadequate heat and fills the room with smoke due to poor ventilation, but it's necessary for survival during the bitter winter months. You take your place at the edge of the room, trying to find a corner that isn't already occupied by someone or something. The walls seem to be closing in, the ceiling lower than you remember. This isn't living, it's merely existing, a grim endurance test with no prize at the end except an early grave and a pauper's funeral. The population density in the poorest areas of London reached over 1,000 people per acre in some blocks. For comparison, modern urban planners consider 100 people per acre to be very high density. In the dim light, you can see bugs crawling across the floor, attracted by the crumbs from dinner. Rats scurry along the baseboards, bold enough to venture out even when humans are present. In buildings like these, the rats aren't just visitors, they're fellow tenants with their own complex societies in the walls and floors. Occasionally, infants are attacked in their sleep, their soft flesh an easy target for hungry rodents. Parents take turns staying awake to shoo them away from the children. The youngest child in the family is ill, a respiratory infection that causes paroxysms of coughing that sometimes end in vomiting. In a modern world, this might be treated with antibiotics, but here, the mother can only offer home remedies, mustard poultices, honey, and lemon if they can afford it. Or more likely, a dose of laudanum, an opium tincture used to quiet everything from colicky infants to consumption. The drug doesn't cure anything, but it silences the coughing long enough for others to sleep. The ceiling has begun to leak again, a slow, steady drip that forms a brown stain on the already filthy floor. The landlord has been informed multiple times, but shows no interest in repairs. When it rains heavily, water pours through in multiple places, forcing the family to position every available container to catch it. The dampness contributes to the mold that grows in black patches on the walls and ceiling, adding its spores to the already toxic air. The children are put to bed, all in a single bed that once had a mattress, but is now just a collection of rags and straw on a wooden frame. They sleep in their clothes. There are no pajamas or nightgowns here. They also sleep in their dirt. The weekly bath, if it happens at all, is taken in a tin tub in front of the fire, with the entire family using the same water in order of age from youngest to oldest, By the time the adults bathe, the water is cold and filthy, but it's still preferable to no bath at all. Outside, the night brings its own symphony of urban misery, drunken arguments, the cries of prostitutes, the occasional gunshot or scream. The walls are thin enough that you can hear the couple next door engaged in either sex or domestic violence. The sounds are disturbingly similar. Privacy is non-existent. The most intimate acts of life are performed within earshot, often within sight of others. This forced proximity creates a strange intimacy among tenement dwellers, a shared experience of degradation that can either foster solidarity or erupt into violence when tensions run high. The married couple in the family have no opportunity for private intimacy, yet pregnancy follows pregnancy with grim regularity. Children are both an economic necessity, more hands to work, and a burden that stretches already inadequate resources. Contraception exists but is rudimentary, expensive, and condemned by both church and state. Abortion, though illegal, is common, performed by angel makers, whose methods are often fatal to the mother as well. Infanticide occurs with disturbing frequency, sometimes actively, through suffocation or exposure, sometimes passively, through neglect or overlaying, allegedly accidentally smothering a baby by rolling onto it in sleep. The hour grows late, but sleep eludes many in the room. The day's labor has exhausted the body but left the mind alert with anxiety. How will the rent be paid if the father remains unemployed? What if the baby's cough turns to pneumonia? What if the rumors of layoffs at the factory prove true? These worries are not abstract. They are immediate threats to survival. A single missed rent payment can mean eviction. A single missed paycheck can mean starvation. A single serious illness can mean death. The dreaded workhouse. When poverty turns to destitution. The spectre that haunts every working-class Victorian is the workhouse, the ultimate destination for those who can no longer support themselves. Established under the Poor Law Amendment, Act of 1834, workhouses were designed to be so unpleasant that only the truly desperate would seek admission. The principle of less eligibility ensured that conditions inside were worse than those of the lowest paid worker outside, to discourage dependency. It was a system built on punishment rather than compassion, on moral judgment rather than social support. Upon entering the workhouse, families are immediately separated, men, women, and children assigned to different sections with minimal contact. Allowed. Husbands and wives might go months without seeing each other. Parents could be separated from children for years. This deliberate destruction of family bonds was one of the most feared aspects of workhouse life and kept many in grinding poverty rather than seeking relief. The emotional trauma of separation was considered an acceptable deterrent to dependency. The work in workhouses was deliberately tedious and often pointless. Breaking stones into gravel, picking oakum, unraveling old ropes into fibers for caulking, ships, grinding corn by hand, or turning a crank thousands of times per day. The labor was designed not to be productive or to teach useful skills, but to be punishing and demoralizing. Even the elderly and infirm were expected to work to the limits of their physical capability. Those who couldn't or wouldn't work received reduced rations or solitary confinement. Food in the workhouse was minimal and monotonous, primarily gruel, a thin porridge of oats and water, bread, cheese, and occasionally potatoes or watery soup. Meat appeared rarely, perhaps once a week in minute portions. Meals were eaten in silence, with conversation forbidden. The dining halls were bare and institutional, with long wooden tables and benches. Portions were strictly controlled, and asking for more was a punishable offence, as immortalised in Dickens' Oliver Twist, with its famous line, "Please, sir, I want some more." Sleeping accommodations were Spartan, long dormitories with narrow beds or pallets, minimal blankets, and no privacy. Sanitation was rudimentary at best, with chamber pots emptied once daily and bathing limited to once weekly, if that. Disease spread rapidly in these conditions, and mortality rates in workhouses were significantly higher than in the general population. Medical care, when available, was provided by the lowest bidding contractor and was often perfunctory or harmful. Discipline was harsh and arbitrary. Infractions such as talking during meals, failing to complete work quotas, or showing insolence could result in reduced rations, solitary confinement, or corporal punishment. Children were not exempt from these punishments. The atmosphere was deliberately prison-like, with inmates required to wear uniforms that marked them as paupers, a public humiliation for those who might leave the workhouse for church services or other approved outings. Children in workhouses received minimal education, basic literacy and numeracy only, with more emphasis on industrial training to prepare them for lives as labourers or servants. Girls learned domestic skills, boys learned trades like shoemaking or tailoring. The quality of instruction was poor, with untrained teachers handling large groups of children of mixed ages and abilities. The primary goal was not education, but inculcating habits of obedience and industry, creating compliant workers for the factories and homes of the wealthy. Death in the workhouse was common and treated with minimal ceremony. Bodies might be used for anatomical study before burial in unmarked graves or mass pits. Funerals were perfunctory, with no family in attendance and no individual markers. The final indignity of workhouse life was to disappear even in death, to leave no trace of one's existence except perhaps an entry in the institution's ledger. The threat of the workhouse hung over every working-class family like a shadow, a fate to be avoided at all costs. Many chose suicide rather than admission. Others endured unimaginable privation, living on the streets or in conditions that would kill weaker individuals. The workhouse represented not just physical hardship, but the complete stripping away of dignity, autonomy, and human connection, a systematic dehumanization of those whose only crime was poverty. Industrial pollution, breathing death, the air, in Victorian cities isn't just unpleasant, it's actively toxic. By the 1890s, London's atmosphere contains a witch's brew of coal smoke, sulfur dioxide, carbon monoxide, and particulate matter, all trapped by frequent temperature inversions that hold the pollution close to the ground. During particularly bad episodes, the famous pea super fogs reduce visibility to inches. People become lost in familiar streets, traffic accidents multiply, respiratory deaths spike dramatically. The smog is thick enough to choke horses in the street. Animals collapse in harness, unable to breathe the poisonous air. Businesses must light lamps at midday. Theatres cancel performances because audiences cannot see the stage. The smog infiltrates every building, coating interiors with greasy soot that stains clothing and skin. Breathing becomes a conscious effort, each inhalation burning the lungs and throat. The primary culprit is coal, burned in household fireplaces, factory furnaces, and power plants. London alone consumes about 10 million tonnes annually by the end of the Victorian era. The cheapest, most polluting grades go to industrial users and the poor, producing thick, sulphurous smoke. Attempts at regulation are feeble and unenforced. Industrial interests successfully argue that pollution controls would harm the economy. The result is air so foul that birds fall dead from the sky and plants wither in parks. The pollution transforms even the rain into a health hazard. Acid rain, though not yet named as such, corrodes stone buildings, kills vegetation, and burns skin. The iconic buildings of London, originally pale limestone or marble, turn black within decades of construction. Cleaning them is futile. They will simply blacken again within months. The city wears its pollution like a shroud, visible evidence of the environmental cost of industrialization. Water pollution matches air pollution in severity. Rivers receive not just human waste but industrial effluent, acids, heavy metals, chemical dyes, animal remains from slaughterhouses. The Thames is biologically dead by mid-century. No fish can survive in its toxic waters. Yet this same river supplies drinking water to millions. Other industrial cities face similar issues. The rivers of Manchester, Birmingham and Leeds become open sewers, their natural flow obscured by a thick layer of industrial waste. Even the soil bears the toxic legacy of Victorian industry. Lead, arsenic, mercury, and other heavy metals accumulate in urban soils, poisoning those who grow food in them or play in parks. These contaminants remain for generations. Modern soil tests in British cities still find dangerous levels of Victorian-era pollutants. Children with elevated blood lead levels suffer developmental delays and behavioral problems, their potential sacrificed to industrial progress made a century before their birth. Respiratory diseases flourish in this toxic environment. Bronchitis, emphysema, pneumonia, and tuberculosis claim thousands of lives annually, particularly among the urban poor, whose housing offers minimal protection from outdoor pollution. Asthma becomes increasingly common, though poorly understood and treated with dubious remedies like tobacco smoke or burning asthma papers impregnated with potassium nitrate. The medical establishment recognizes the correlation between air pollution and respiratory disease but lacks effective treatments or preventive measures. Environmental regulations, when they exist at all, are routinely ignored or circumvented. Factory inspectors are too few and often corrupt. Fines for violations are minimal compared to the cost of pollution controls. The doctrine of laissez-faire capitalism prevails, with the government reluctant to interfere with industry even when public health is clearly threatened. The wealthy can escape to country estates when pollution is worst. The poor have no such option. The full death toll from Victorian industrial pollution can never be known, but estimates suggest that air pollution alone killed tens of thousands. Annually in London during the worst periods, the Great Smog of 1952, though after the Victorian era, was the culmination of trends established during that period and killed approximately 12,000 people in a single week. It was this catastrophe, not the suffering of generations of urban poor, that finally prompted effective clean air legislation. The Victorian moral paradox. Victorian society operates on a complex system of moral codes that are simultaneously rigid and remarkably flexible depending on one's social class. The official morality emphasizes sexual restraint, hard work, sobriety, cleanliness, and religious observance. These virtues are particularly expected of women who bear the burden of being the moral centers of their households. Yet beneath this surface of propriety runs a current of hypocrisy so strong it threatens to undermine the entire moral structure. The wealthy man who publicly condemns prostitution may regularly visit brothels. The society matron who ostentatiously attends church may treat her servants with cruelty that borders on sadism. The industrialist who funds orphanages may employ children in dangerous factories. This disconnect between public morality and private behavior is not just common, but institutionalized. For women, the moral code is particularly suffocating. Female sexuality is so thoroughly denied that respectable women are expected to endure rather than enjoy marital relations. A woman who expresses sexual desire risks being labeled mentally ill. The diagnosis of hysteria covers everything from depression to sexual frustration to legitimate medical complaints. The treatment often involves genital massage by doctors to induce hysterical paroxysm, orgasm, a procedure not considered sexual because it's performed by a physician. Meanwhile, prostitution thrives as an open secret, with estimates suggesting over 80,000 prostitutes in London alone by mid-century. Many are as young as 12 or 13, driven to the trade by poverty or after being dismissed from domestic service for pregnancy, often resulting from rape by their employers. The men who use their services span all social classes, from labourers spending their meagre wages to aristocrats maintaining expensive mistresses. This sexual double standard, purity demanded of respectable women while prostitution is tacitly accepted, epitomizes Victorian hypocrisy. Child-rearing practices reflect similar contradictions. Children are sentimentalized in literature and art as innocent beings needing protection, yet subjected to brutal discipline at home and exploitation in the workplace. Physical punishment is routine in both settings, with children beaten for infractions as minor as speaking out of turn or working too slowly. The wealthy may outsource this discipline to nannies, governesses, and schoolmasters, but the principle remains the same, breaking the child's will to ensure obedience. Charity becomes a performance of virtue rather than a genuine attempt to address systemic problems. The wealthy donate to orphanages and hospitals that bear their names, ensuring their generosity is publicly recognized. These same benefactors may own slum properties or pay starvation wages in their factories, creating the very conditions that necessitate charity. The poor are expected to demonstrate appropriate gratitude and moral reformation in exchange for assistance, reinforcing the notion that poverty results from moral failing rather than structural inequality. On the global stage, Britain presents itself as a civilizing force, bringing Christianity, commerce, and civilization to backward peoples. This moral justification for empire obscures the exploitation, violence, and cultural destruction that accompanies colonization. The wealth that flows into Britain from its colonies, extracted through forced labor and unequal trade, helps fund the industrial growth that creates both the splendor of Victorian achievements and the squalor of its urban poor. The temperance movement gained strength throughout the Victorian period, portraying alcohol as the root of working-class suffering rather than a symptom of it. Middle-class reformers condemn the pub while ignoring the conditions that make it an essential escape. Meanwhile, the wealthy consume alcohol freely in their clubs and homes, their drinking considered sophisticated rather than debauched. Some temperance advocates are sincere in their concern. Others use moral reform as a tool of social control, attempting to reshape working-class culture to better serve industrial capitalism. The criminal justice system embodies these contradictions most starkly. Harsh penalties for property crimes protect the possessions of the wealthy, while crimes committed by the powerful, fraud, exploitation, dangerous working conditions, go unpunished. A hungry child stealing a loaf of bread might receive a prison sentence. A factory owner whose negligence causes multiple deaths faces at most a fine. The principle that all are equal before the law exists in theory but not in practice. This moral framework serves multiple purposes. It justifies the extreme inequality of Victorian society by attributing success to virtue and failure to vice. It provides psychological comfort to the wealthy by casting their privilege as deserved. And it offers the middle class a way to distinguish themselves from the undeserving poor through performative respectability. The system works precisely because of its flexibility, the appearance of moral absolutism combined with the practical application of situational ethics depending on one's social position. Night falls on Victorian misery. Night in a Victorian city brings little relief. The temperature may drop, but the humidity remains, making your clothes stick to your skin. The sounds of the city change but never cease. Drunken arguments, the screams of victims, the occasional gunshot or police whistle. The darkness brings its own dangers, particularly for women and children, who may fall prey to predators both human and microbial. Sleep comes in fits and starts, interrupted by the coughing of your roommates, the crying of babies, the itching of bites, and the constant anxiety that tomorrow will be just as hellish as today. And it will be. This is your life now, a grinding cycle of work, squalor, and bare survival that will continue until your body gives out, typically in your early 40s if you're lucky, much sooner if you're not. Religion offers little comfort beyond the promise of a better afterlife, a promissory note that can never be cashed in this world. The established Church of England largely serves the interests of the wealthy and powerful, preaching acceptance of the social order as divinely ordained. Alternative faiths, Methodism, Baptism, various dissenting sects, gain followers among the working class by offering more immediate spiritual solace and sometimes practical assistance. But they too ultimately reinforce the idea that suffering should be endured rather than challenged. You lie on your shared mattress, staring up at the ceiling that drips with condensation, and wonder how long you can endure this. The average Victorian working-class person died in their early 40s, worn out by labour, malnutrition and disease. Many didn't even make it that far. Children died in droves. More than 25% never saw their 5th birthday. These weren't just statistics to the Victorians. They were sons and daughters, husbands and wives, friends and neighbours, each death leaving behind those who must somehow continue in their absence. The infant mortality rate tells its own story of Victorian urban life. In some areas, up to 50% of children died before age 5, with summer diarrhea, diphtheria, scarlet fever, and measles being major killers. Parents faced an impossible choice: spend precious time and resources trying to save a sickly child, potentially neglecting their other children and their work, or accept the loss as inevitable and focus on those with better chances of survival. The emotional toll of these repeated losses is incalculable. Outside, the night's activities grow rowdier as the pubs close, releasing their patrons into streets already dangerous by day and doubly so after dark. Violence erupts easily in communities where tension, frustration, and desperation simmer constantly beneath the surface. The police, if they respond at all, are more likely to arrest all participants than to determine guilt or innocence. A night in jail means a day's wages lost, which might mean eviction or hunger for an entire family. The sex trade continues throughout the night, with women and girls risking violence, disease, and arrest to earn enough for a night's lodging or a meal. Some work independently, others answer to brutal pimps who take most of their earnings in exchange for protection. Venereal disease is rampant and untreatable, syphilis in particular causing slow, painful deterioration over years or decades. The Contagious Diseases Acts allow authorities to forcibly examine any woman suspected of prostitution, a humiliating and invasive procedure that does nothing to address the economic conditions driving women to the trade. Disease makes its round through the tenement, touching some and sparing others with seeming randomness. Tuberculosis, cholera, typhoid, smallpox, the 4 horsemen of the Victorian apocalypse, claim victims daily. Medical care, if available at all, is primitive and often counterproductive. Bloodletting, purging, blistering, and toxic medicines containing mercury, arsenic, or opium may hasten death rather than prevent it. The germ theory of disease is still gaining acceptance. Many doctors continue to blame miasma or moral failings for illness. Someone rises in the darkness to use the chamber pot, trying not to disturb the others but failing. In a room this crowded, every movement affects everyone. Privacy is non-existent. Bodily functions are performed in full view or at best behind a hastily hung sheet. The stench rises, adding to the already foul air. Tomorrow someone will have to empty the pot in the communal privy, a task that rotates among family members old enough to carry it without spilling. The night wears on, each hour bringing its own torments. The baby's cough worsens, the mother tries everything: steam, rubbing the chest with goose fat, a few precious drops of laudanum to ease the spasms. Nothing helps. By morning, the cough may improve, or the child may join the statistics of infant mortality. This is not an unusual night, it's simply life in Victorian urban poverty, a daily battle against forces that seem designed to grind human beings into dust, tucking you in, the final nightmare. So now, dear viewer, as you lie in your lice-infested bed, in your overcrowded room, in your crumbling tenement, in your polluted city, perhaps you'll think twice about romanticizing the Victorian era. Perhaps you'll appreciate your clean water, your private bathroom, your 8-hour workday, and your child labour laws. Perhaps you'll recognise that the gleaming facade of Victorian achievement, the architectural marvels, technological innovations, and global empire was built on a foundation of human suffering so vast and systemic that we're still grappling with its legacies today. This is the reality behind the polished facades of Victorian achievement. This is the human cost of progress. This is the dark heart of the empire upon which the sun supposedly never sets, though given the thickness of the smog, it's often impossible to tell whether the sun is shining at all. The Victorian era gave us magnificent buildings, revolutionary technologies, and literary masterpieces. It also gave us child labour, industrial pollution, and public health crises that killed millions. The next time you admire a Victorian building or read a Victorian novel, remember the hands that built it or the conditions that inspired it, the hands of underpaid, overworked labourers, the conditions of desperate inequality and urban squalor. Dawn approaches, and with it another day of the same grinding poverty, the same back-breaking labour, the same omnipresent filth and disease. There is no escape, no respite, no hope of improvement. This is not a temporary condition but a permanent state, the natural order according to Victorian social philosophy, which sees poverty as a moral failing rather than a structural problem. The poor deserve their fate, the rich deserve their privilege. The system works exactly as designed. The legacy of this system extends far beyond the Victorian era itself. The physical infrastructure of cities, the social attitudes toward poverty, the environmental damage from early industrialization, all continue to shape our world. Modern Britain still bears the scars of Victorian inequality with class divisions that, while less extreme, follow patterns established in the 19th century. The terraced houses, the factory buildings converted to luxury apartments, the grand public buildings, all stand as physical reminders of an age that created both tremendous wealth and tremendous suffering. So the next time you find yourself idealizing the Victorian era, the architecture, the literature, the apparent moral clarity, remember what you've experienced in this journey. Remember the child laborers, the cholera victims, the women dying. In childbirth, the families separated in workhouses, the bodies piling up during epidemics. Remember that the celebrated achievements of the age came at an incalculable human cost, borne primarily by those whose names never entered the historical record. Subscribe if you've never had to share your bed with 6 coughing strangers and a bucket of urine. Like this video if you've never had to drink water from a river that doubles as a toilet for 2 million people. Comment below with what you'd miss most about modern life if you were suddenly transported to a Victorian slum. Indoor plumbing, antibiotics, basic human rights. Remember, you wanted history. You got tetanus. Sleep tight. Try not to breathe too deeply.